Our jurors are present and accounted for, Judge.
Great. Thank you, Deputy Murphy. You all can be seated. Welcome back, jurors. We're going to break for lunch probably around 12:45, maybe a little before. We have a conference call at 1. So if we need to end earlier for your needs, let me know. But otherwise, the expectation is we'll go till about 12:45-ish before we break for lunch. Mr. Harper.
Thank you. Judge, Mr. Gardner, I understood you were present for Mr. Knox's presentation, correct?
Yes, sir.
You were also provided a copy of his presentation, correct?
That's correct, sir.
And you reviewed that presentation, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Right. Do you have some slides that you want to show us with regard to where the weapon might be in Mr. Knox's presentation?
I had issue with 2 photographs Mr. Knox used as demonstratives. Can you clear that screen again, sir?
Yes, sure. Well, I can try. How's that?
In my demonstrative, I'm using a red gun. It's no big deal. I'm not taking Mr. Knox's model to task for using his hand. I've done it many times myself. But when we build demonstratives as crime scene analysts, we're expected to watch for bias and or inaccurate, something that would infer something that could not occur. And this photograph is bothersome for a simple reason. The model is seated there. We can see the trajectory rod coming out. You can see that the model's thumb is just above that trajectory rod. And in fact, the right thumb is just above that trajectory rod. And the model is doing the classic finger gun. I mean, all of us, well, not all of us, but most of us at some point played cops and robbers or cowboys and Indians. We didn't have a gun, so we used our finger, and crime scene analysts do the same thing. But we also recognize that the finger gun represents something. The index finger represents the barrel. In this photograph, effectively, Mr. Knox's model's index finger is, as we look at it, appears to be relatively parallel to the trajectory rod. And actually, we're looking downward, and so there's a bit of a parallax. Even though it looks like it's parallel, in order to maintain that looking down, you'd actually have to drop the rod a little bit further. That's one photograph. In this one, he's doing the same thing. Once again, the thumb is above the trajectory rod. The index finger appears to be approximately at that point. And it's suggesting that the gun could be held in this orientation. The problem with that is that no modern firearm has a trigger behind the barrel, and certainly not this Smith & Wesson. There is about a 1 3/4 inch difference between where the barrel is and where the trigger is. So in these 2 demonstratives, they infer that I can hold the gun in this fashion, and if in fact the model had placed his finger in an appropriate location, 1 3/4 inches down, that is no longer possible. His own photographs recognize that there's not enough room to drop the gun, hold the gun like this. So my concern was that these 2 photographs suggest something that, frankly speaking, are inaccurate.
So there are concerns about spatial constraints, correct? That's concerns number 1.
Legal.
And are there also concerns about the demonstrative with regard to where, in fact, on Mr. Knox's demonstrative, the weapon was, correct?
I raised that issue.
Correct.
Okay.
I raised that issue with you, yes, sir.
Okay. In your opinion, based upon the entirety of your analysis, where would the gun have had to be in your professional opinion?
I have a confidence that the weapon was somewhere between the forward hip and the lower thigh at the time of discharge. Keep in mind that the trajectory rod can't move. Everything that we do, whether we're changing orientation, the weapon and the shooter must align to the trajectory rod. The trajectory rod can't be moved around. Remember that the red gun that I'm showing here is slightly larger at the grip, but those grips are not, 3/4 of an inch is not enough taken off of there to then take that gun down and have it here. This is a generally similar stature individual as to Mr. McIver, and you can't rotate that gun. So the gun must be oriented somewhat sideways. Again, it could have been oriented all the way over here. It's an assumption that it must be the right hand. The left hand could have initiated the trigger. There's no way of knowing that. So the gun could have been here, through here, seated here. It will be at least 6 inches from the front, or the front seat, the back of the front seat. We can't bring the gun back into this area unless we remove Mr. McIver. And certainly he can't hold the gun back over here on his right hip unless you contort him. You're physically going to have to raise him up, get him up over here like this in order to shoot the gun from this orientation. You've got to get him out of the way in order for the gun to go here. So that's what we know. And that's all we know. We lost information, unfortunately, but we can't fix that.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. Mr. Rucker may have some questions.
He does have some questions. You're right. All right. Good morning. Good morning. Council, good morning. And Mr. Hyde. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, Mr. Gardner.
Good morning, Mr. Rucker.
How you doing?
Very good, sir.
Good. Good to see you again.
Thank you, sir.
Now, can you tell the jurors, with respect to the work that you did in this case, I came and met you and provided you access to the vehicle itself.
Yes, sir, on February 1st.
And who was there with us at that time?
You had an investigator there, and Chris Robinson, Don Samuels was there the first time. The second time I was given access, Chris Robinson was with me.
Okay.
So there were 4 of us, as I recall.
Yes. And about how long did you have an opportunity to look at the vehicle?
With all due respect, I don't remember exactly. We were there a good couple of hours, I think.
Okay. And did I prohibit you from doing anything with respect to any examinations that you wanted to do?
No, sir, none at all.
And in fact, Mr. Samuel and myself, we were pretty much standing off to the side talking.
Yes, sir.
During your examination, correct?
Correct.
Now, can you tell the jurors, did Mr. Harvey ever accompany you out to observe your examination of the vehicle?
No, sir.
Never.
No, sir.
To your knowledge, has he ever seen the vehicle?
I couldn't answer that, sir. Not when I was present.
Okay. And you know that the vehicle is in a stored warehouse-like facility that the DA's office controls.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And if the jurors themselves wanted to get in the vehicle, sit in the back seat, we could put the trajectory rod back through it. They can kind of close the door and see for themselves what the spatial constraints are like.
Absolutely.
Correct?
Stop. That's still...
So, ladies and gentlemen, it's not Mr. Rucker's decision
whether you all can sit in the car or not. It's my decision. So, and it's certainly not Mr. Gardner's decision. I'm sure he wouldn't stand in the way of anything like that, not his role to work through that. Should disregard the exchange that just happened. If and when it becomes appropriate for something like that to happen, it would be because I decided that it was appropriate to happen, and not one side or the other or anything like that. It's working through what evidence is in the case and what evidence is not in the case.
And Judge, I'll apologize. I didn't mean to suggest that. I didn't.
I did not feel like you were encroaching
Okay.
on my authority.
Okay.
I think that Mr. Harvey had a fair concern about what that exchange implied.
Okay.
And I just want to make clear to the jurors that I would need to determine that it's appropriate for there to be an evidentiary review. That is a court call, not...
Make sure the volume's on your phone is turned off.
It's not a default matter, of course.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay. All right. You determined a couple of conclusions based on the work that you did. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And let me just ask you about a couple of your conclusions. Just take that one down, please. Okay. Let me ask you this, Mr. Gardner. Do you agree that in order to make this gun discharge, the trigger has to be pulled? You agree with that?
Not in those words. The trigger had to be manipulated, sir.
What's the difference between manipulation and pulled?
Well, unintentional discharge can occur when something comes in contact with a trigger. So, once again, I wasn't there. Unintentional discharge occurred. Something manipulated the trigger. Finger or object is possible.
Okay. Well, you know that based on the facts of this case, that Mr. McIver was holding a gun in his hands, right?
I'm not aware of what his testimony is. I'm confident that based on everything I've said, the weapon was somewhere in his lap. I don't know what the condition was, where his hand was, internally, externally, whatever. But
Okay.
yes, sir, I would agree with you. Mr. McIver's in control of the weapon.
Okay. And so as part of the analysis that you did in this case, you were not provided with a transcript of his statement to the Atlanta Police Department?
I would never incorporate testimonial evidence into a crime scene reconstruction. That violates every basic rule that we have. The crime scene analysis is based on the physical evidence. Once again, I generally understand that he was in the back seat. I generally understand that the gun went off. And beyond that, there's nothing I need to know from a crime scene analysis perspective beyond that.
So let me just ask you this. So can you offer the jury any information about where this gun was in relationship to Mr. McIver at the time that he discharged?
Yes, sir. As I described, the weapon was functionally, and this makes a certain assumption, and I think everybody's making this assumption. If he is seated, as everyone has demonstrated, Mr. Knox, Mr. Dustin, and so forth, and myself.
Before you answer that assumption,
He's got a right to answer the question as he sees appropriate. You can't cut him off if you don't like the damn answer.
Okay, no need to get vulgar with us, Mr. Hart. Take a seat.
Ms. Rucker, if we assume that Mr. McIver is in the seat in a standard orientation, and there's good reason to believe that because there are objects to his left that would prevent him from being significantly to the left, then the weapon is at his thigh, potentially as far back as, given his forearm, I would think the upper thigh.
Okay.
Could have been forward as far as the lower thigh, so somewhere in that area. And as I described, it's not oriented upright this way, it's probably oriented in some fashion, can rotate in this fashion.
Okay.
What was to his left? We heard you talk a lot about his right. What are you saying was to his left?
In the crime scene photographs that they took, so there's a series of objects. I'm not sure if I recall the specifics. There was a purse and some other objects that do not appear to have been dislodged, disrupted, suggesting then that he is in that right side and not dramatically off to the offset.
Okay. And that's an assumption, right?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay. And that assumption is based on what? What do you base that assumption on? Where he was seated in that upright position? Where did you get that from?
That's the only place that the shooter has to be somewhere in the back seat.
Okay.
Okay. The gun is firing from the right side, again, unless there is a contorted position, which I can never exclude.
Okay.
Frankly speaking, the guy could have been draped across the back seat, if you really want to get crazy about it, feet on top of everything, and over here going like this. I mean,
Right.
I'm basing my positioning of him based upon what Mr. Knox and Mr. Dustin believed, based on what I was told by Mr. Harvey. I was certainly given that information. He was in the back seat.
Okay. Let me ask you this.
Yes, sir.
You can't tell the jury what was in the mind of Mr. McIver at the time that the trigger was manipulated.
No,
right?
sir, not at all.
And so this whole conversation you have had with us about an unintentional pull, the converse is true as well, correct? That is, that it could have been a deliberately intended pull.
Oh, yes, sir, I think I said that.
Perhaps not that clearly.
No, sir, I think I was pretty clear. I said it was either an intentional act or it was an unintentional act. It was not an accidental discharge where the firearm failed and discharged independently.
Right. So if Mr. McIver just said, hey, the gun just went off all by itself because the vehicle hit a bump, that would just be untrue, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Just a lie, right?
Well,
Except for he never said.
misconception, I won't
Well,
characterize
it's
it.
an if, and you can explore whatever. It's a hypothetical.
If Mr. McIver told people that this gun just went off, that would be untrue, correct?
And that's all he said, yes, sir.
Do you agree that the trajectory for this bullet was from the right to the left?
Absolutely.
And I think what you said is that there is kind of you came up with 0.5, Mr. Knox came up with 2.5, but based on your expertise, that's within the range of acceptable differences.
Well, within the discipline, that is well within the range of acceptable variance.
Right. And so you have the bullet path going from right to left and kind of horizontal.
No, just slightly downward.
You have it going slightly downward.
Yeah, when I say generally horizontal, I mean, if you want to argue 1 or 2 degrees, you're welcome to do that. To me, that 2, 3, 4, 5 degrees is generally horizontal to the ground plane. I measured it at 0.5 degrees. It's 0.5 degrees downward. Mr. Knox measured it at 2.5 degrees. Again, what's the difference? 20 inches back, 0.6 inches. So.
Okay. And you said, I think I wrote the quote down, it really doesn't matter to you, right, if the jury accepts Mr. Knox's explanation or yours, right?
No explanation.
That's not explanation. I think that's an improper.
Okay, well, let me rephrase the question.
Witness has already said that, so you and the witness agree, Mr. Harvey.
Right.
Thank you.
Well, tell the jurors, what did you mean when you said it doesn't matter to you?
No, sir. We were discussing the measurement of the angles. Mr. Knox's angles are 2 degrees off in both elevation and horizontal from mine. Which one any person chooses to look at it means nothing to a crime scene analyst or shooting incident reconstruction. Granted, I know you guys like to argue a lot of silly stuff, but for us, 2 degrees means nothing. And so if someone said, hey, I like the way that Mr. Knox measured this, I would have no objection to them accepting his numbers over mine.
Okay. Now, can you tell the jurors, how many reports have you generated with respect to the work you did in this case?
2.
And what's the difference between the first one and the second?
In the first one, I used your name as the first name of Mr. McIver. It's Claude instead of Clinton. There was a typo on a second page. Hang on a second. Do you mind if I
No, absolutely.
can actually tell you exactly? Yeah, the name on page 2, typo on page 3. I think that's pretty much it,
Okay.
as far as I know.
Okay. And you were able to sit in the court and to watch Mr. Knox's testimony, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, when did you prepare your PowerPoint?
Probably, well, the vast majority of it, probably last week. I'm not sure. I added the 2 photographs from Mr. Knox's presentation after they were brought in here.
Okay. So you didn't have a PowerPoint at the time that you prepared your report?
No, sir. The PowerPoint comes as a result of the report. I can't identify my conclusions till I know what my conclusions are.
I understand. And your report was turned over when?
It's dated 9
You asked me
March.
when he gave it to Mr. Harvey. He might not know when it was given to you.
I'm asking, when did you give it to Mr. Harvey? That's a better question.
Well, it's dated on 9 March 2018. I think the PDF version was sent to him either that day or the next. I'd have to actually go look at my emails. It was within a few days of that day.
Okay. And March the 9th of this year, you know that was 4 days in the jury selection, right?
I wasn't aware of that, but if you say so, sir.
Okay. And that's when you would have finished your report on March the 9th, 2018, right?
Yes, sir. 9 March 2018.
And then the slides came like about a week ago,
Week and a half, yes, sir.
right? After Mr. Knox testified.
No. Most of my slides were already created before he testified. I added his 2 photographs that he presented in the court after he testified.
Okay.
So my PowerPoint existed, again, I'd have to go look at dates, but I probably 2-3 weeks ago at least, because I was at a meeting and we were discussing what should or should not be presented.
Mm-hmm. And so did you give your slides to Mr. Harvey at that time?
I thought I did.
You don't remember?
No, sir, I thought I had.
But you
I
hadn't?
thought- Well, Mr. Harvey believes I did not. I copied them onto a thumb drive, thought I had all the documents on it, handed that off to him. I think he contacted me at some subsequent point and said, hey, I'm not sure I have them, and so the PowerPoint was resent.
Okay. The 2 slides that you added to your PowerPoint, did you provide me with a copy of those? Before you testified here today?
No, sir. They were photographs of Mr. Knox's. They were photographs already presented to the court.
Right.
They weren't my photographs.
I understand, but my question is, did you inform me that they were going to be a part of your slide presentation before you testified today?
Yesterday, I made comments, sir. I said, hey, the PowerPoints you have, we were talking right there, indicated that the PowerPoint that you had, that I had added a couple. And I discussed with Mr. Harvey the idea that we probably ought to print that out again because of the 3 new slides, so you'd have it.
Right.
But yes, sir, I did mention it to you.
Yeah, you
might
mentioned it
not
to me.
recall.
Right. But I guess this is my question. You said, hey, I added a couple of slides. But you never really told me which ones.
No, sir, I didn't.
Yeah, okay.
I'm sorry.
Apology accepted. Now, let me talk to you just about a couple of your other conclusions.
Yes, sir.
One, this morning, you called the revolver a Taurus when really it's a Smith & Wesson, correct?
That's what I said.
Okay. Now you know that was just a mistake on your part, right?
Doesn't affect my conclusion,
I
sir.
understand. Can you tell the jurors who is the model that we see in the demonstrative right here?
Mr. Samuels.
That's Mr. Samuels.
In my demonstrative,
And
yes.
that one right there.
Yeah, that's Mr. Samuels.
Okay. And how tall is Mr. Samuels?
I don't know the specific height, sir.
You don't know?
I'm judging it from visual.
Okay.
I did not measure him. I did not get his weight. He is a general demonstrative. And I guess it's interesting because Mr. Knox has a rather large man in there, and I don't think anybody knows what his number is either.
Well, that's an assumption that you're making, aren't you?
Nope.
Yeah, you don't know, do you?
I didn't hear it reported in court.
That doesn't mean you don't know it, though, do you?
No, I don't, sir.
Right. So, and you don't know Mr. Samuels' weight at the time that you took this photo, correct?
No, sir, I do not.
Okay. How tall is Mr. McIver?
Not that tall to me.
What is that?
I do not have a number, sir, as I previously stated. I didn't measure Mr. Samuels or weigh him. I did not measure Mr. McIver or weigh him. Then visually they are of similar height and composure.
Were they of similar height and composure based on the way Mr. McIver looked in September of 2016? Do you know that?
Yeah, actually I was told that Mr. McIver has lost some weight since then.
How much weight has he lost?
I don't know, sir.
You don't know. But I thought you said in your profession, like, numbers matter.
Not in a demonstrative, no, sir.
Oh, okay. So I thought when you told the jurors how wrong Mr. Knox's demonstrative was, it was based on some numbers, wasn't it? Like
yes, sir.
inches.
Yes, inches. Well, if you want to argue that my model was not a perfect match, that's certainly possible, and I would certainly acknowledge it.
Right.
But Mr. Knox's demonstrative interjected a specific bias suggesting that a gun was in a particular orientation when it was not possible. Now, if you can convince me, sir, that any human being in here, other than a weightlifter or a petite woman, have a particular thigh that would somehow be less than 5 inches or 6 inches in width, I might reconsider my demonstrative. But until then, I'm going to accept it because that's the number I have to play with, 6 inches.
The truth of the matter is, your demonstrative is no more exact than the way in which you tried to criticize Mr. Knox's demonstrative, right?
No, sir, that's not correct.
Okay. Let me ask you this. You talked about how there are these constraints. You know, when you sit back there in the back seat and you close the car door, there are these constraints with your right arm, right?
Absolutely.
And you showed us the demonstrative. Can you go to the slide where we see you with your arm demonstrating how impossible it is?
Oh, hang on, sir. I just killed that. Can you start up?
Oh, hold on. Let me get one of my young millennials. I'm not Mr. Hardware. I am technologically challenged, y'all.
My apology. I killed it.
The first one says it's not a permanent kill.
Yes, do you want the one where I'm... Which one do you want? I'll
The
take you
one
through
that
them all.
you used to explain to the jurors that it's kind of physically impossible to get your arm back in that position that you said Mr. Knox was wrong about. That one.
This is the first one.
Okay. And for the record, that is RG0196, correct?
Correct, sir.
Okay, that's you, isn't it?
Correct, sir.
That's your arm?
Correct, sir.
How tall are you?
6'2".
You're 6'2".
Yeah.
You don't know how tall Mr. McIver is, do you?
No, but I know how long his arm is compared to mine.
You measured it?
Yes, sir.
Did you put it in your report?
No,
Why not?
because it was a point of view that came to me after the report was written.
Wait a minute.
I'm sorry. It's a number that I considered and said, hey, have I created a bias in my or in my demonstrative? So I double checked it. His arm is 2 inches shorter than mine.
How do you know that?
Because I compared them, sir.
How do you
Physically.
compare them?
Mr. McIver, put your arm out. I put my arm out. I'm looking at it. His fingers stopped here. My fingers continued on. It was about 2.5 inches.
Did you measure it?
No.
Did you put that process in your report? You left that out, didn't you?
It wasn't, I didn't do it until after the report.
Did you do a supplemental report? Like just jot down the line, hey, Mr. Rucker, I did these measurements, and guess what? Mr. McIver's arm is just 2 inches shorter than mine. You didn't do that, did you?
No, sir, I didn't.
Okay. Were you trying to surprise me here today?
No, sir. I'm just surprised we're talking about it.
Why? Because you said it's a factor. You said it's the reason why you can come in here and tell this jury that he couldn't have done exactly what Mr. Knox said he did. It's more than just a little factor, isn't it?
Well, the length of the arm is not the factor here. In this photograph, the length of the arm isn't the issue. It's where the arm must be. I think there's a difference of perspective, and maybe you're arguing something relative to where his arm might extend into his lap.
Okay.
But this photograph is designed to show that you can't put his hand down by his right hip with the weapon in an upright position. That's what it's intended to show.
I understand.
It is demonstrative.
I understand, even though your arm in that photo is 2 inches longer than his, right?
Yeah.
Right? Okay. How long is your thigh?
How long is my thigh?
Yeah, the place where you say the gun could be, where you showed us the demonstrative, where the gun could be along your thigh. How long is your thigh?
Haven't measured my thigh recently.
Haven't measured your thigh. How wide is your thigh?
About 7.5 inches.
You've measured that?
I haven't passed, yes.
Okay. And what was it on the day that you did this?
No, Mr.
You don't know. How about Mr. McIver? How long is his thigh?
Don't know.
You don't know. How wide is his thigh back in September 2016?
Don't know.
You don't know. When you were measuring the length and comparing the length of your arm to his arm, did you say, hey, Mr. McIver, can you show me how you were holding a gun that night?
No, sir, I would never have done that.
Never would have done that. Because for you, that's not important, is it?
Testimonial evidence? No, sir, it's not. Never introduced it into a crime scene analysis.
Right. But couldn't we make some conclusions if we knew how he was holding a gun? Wouldn't that go to whether or not we could determine whether it was intentional or unintentional?
Well, I'm not confident that I would agree that you could define intentional or unintentional, but absolutely, I'm in absolute agreement with you. If they had seized his pants, we wouldn't be having this argument.
Okay, and who has seized his pants?
APD.
APD. How about his shirt?
Shirt wouldn't matter. What we're concerned with is cylinder gap flash.
I understand. So, based on where you say the gun would have been when it discharged, you said on his thigh, right?
Somewhere between his lap, his upper thigh, and his lower thigh.
Right. And so if he had a golf shirt like tucked in when he got in the truck, but the shirt was kind of tucked out when he got out the truck at the hospital, I mean, you could look at the shirt and do some testing to see.
No, so you wouldn't go after the shirt. The shirt is...
Let me object to the hypothetical, which is not so
He's an expert. I can give him hypotheticals.
by any.
You know.
I can't read without my glasses anyhow. Not based on anything in evidence. It's just pure speculation. Where somebody's shirt was and where it was when he got in.
Okay, well, the answer has consistently been Mr. Gardner wouldn't be interested in the shirt. So let's move away from the shirt.
I got you. And just a quick response for the record, the videotape at the valet is in evidence, and it does show.
It shows what
Right,
it shows.
what it shows, what it shows.
The basis of your question, but we received consistent answers to it.
Okay. Let me ask you another question.
Yes, sir.
Now, can you go to the demonstrative photo where we can see the gun that you used and the trajectory where you got the muzzle? That right there.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
So now you say that based on the analysis that you did in this case, that you can tell this jury with some confidence, I think that's the word you used, that the gun was on its side, or it could have been upside down.
Yes, sir. Any
Right.
number of possibilities.
I guess if you know, if I could twist my wrist around, you saying it could just be all the way around like this.
I guess, but you have to also consider that the left hand could have been in control of the weapon.
Okay. Do you know what hand Mr. McIver is? Is he right-handed or left-handed?
Doesn't matter. What is possible, Mr.
Let me ask you
Rucker?
this. Demonstrate for the jurors how you can get the gun in this position right here with this trajectory with your left hand. Let me see. Could you come down here so the jurors can see?
You got a check?
Yeah. Hold on. Yeah. Hold on 1 second.
What is possible is what we concern ourselves with. I can't tell you which hand. So if the hand is here, we can get that trajectory. If the hand were here, I can get that trajectory. I mean, anyone who has... I'm 61 years old. I don't bend quite the way I used to, but I kind of figured that that's pretty simple for me to do.
Well, to get that right to left,
Yes, sir.
you can do it like that. With your left hand? Let me see. Now let me ask you this. That's kind of crazy looking, isn't it?
Darn straight. And I didn't state that this was the position. You did.
Okay. Wait a minute, hold on 1 second. You said he could have done it with either hand. Isn't that what you said?
That's exactly what I said.
Okay, so I didn't say it. You said it.
You brought the left hand into play. I'm simply telling you, no one can exclude the left hand.
Okay, that's fine. Show it to me again. That's
Which one, this one?
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
You got it, sir.
You can take your seat.
May I get
Yes. I'm sorry. Yes, sir. Okay. Now, can you tell the jurors, did you conduct any examination with respect to the weapon itself?
No, sir.
So,
Other than the visual one, are you talking physical?
Yeah.
No, sir, I did not.
you didn't test fire the gun.
No, sir.
You didn't test the double and single action.
I am not a firearms examiner. I do not test weapons.
Okay. So let me ask you this. Can you tell the jurors why in your demonstrative did you use like a totally different kind of gun? Like you didn't use a revolver. You used a semi-automatic gun, didn't you?
Well, as I said before, sir, it's demonstrative. I could have used my finger gun, but instead I used what I have available, the red guns we use. I don't have a red gun revolver, and so I made the point that, I thought I made the point clearly that the red gun is about 3 inches shorter, so you got to take that into consideration, and 0.75 inches less of a grip, so you have to take that in consideration. But the point is, it's demonstrative. I teach people to build demonstratives. This is what we do. We can't replicate every single thing. The point is to show general orientation.
And you know I understand that, don't you?
Well, you're acting like you don't.
Okay. Well, could it be that I am acting like you are telling the jurors something that really doesn't make any sense?
If you can point out...
Could that be it too?
Now we're just devolving into
It is, and I need folks in the gallery to stay quiet, all right? We're going to have this testimony, and if you can't stay quiet, step outside. Thanks.
Okay. This is my point.
Yes, sir.
How long is the length of that gun? From the muzzle all the way to the back of it?
Boy, howdy. Hang on a second. I know how much longer it is to the revolver. I've got to go back and look at the photograph of the revolver. Do you have that photograph, sir? I do not have it. If you want that number, if you'll give me the photograph of the Smith & Wesson revolver, I can tell you.
Yeah, you mean the photograph that was taken by Mr. Knox?
Correct, sir.
Okay.
May I see it here, sir?
Thank you.
Are we and what measurement do you want? I presume you want
I
barrel.
don't presume he's going to tell you in just a second.
Yes, sir.
Trying to get the photo.
And let me, okay.
What measurement do you want, sir?
For the record, this comes from State's Exhibit 290, Your Honor. This is page 21. And let me see. Actually, I think this was a photo. Did you use this photo? This is page 20. This is the photo.
Yeah, I think this is the one we use, sir.
Okay. This is in your PowerPoint, isn't it?
Correct, sir.
You could have just pulled this photo out for us, couldn't you?
Yes, sir. That's
Okay.
what I was telling you. I just didn't have a copy of it up here.
Oh, you don't have a copy of this photo in your PowerPoint?
Correct. That's one of the 3 slides we discussed.
Okay. Didn't we look at this photo when you testified for Mr. Harkin?
Yes, sir. It was in the PowerPoint. I don't have a copy of it here.
Oh, but you got the clicker though, don't you?
Oh, yes, sir. Could have gone there. My apologies.
Okay. All right. So my question to you is, how long is the length of the red gun if you measure it as compared to the way the actual revolver?
What length?
Huh?
What length? Overall length?
Yes.
Don't know. I can measure from breech to the muzzle, tip of the muzzle, and in this, we'd be looking at 3.5. So it's about 3.5. It's about 5 3/4 inches from breech to muzzle tip.
This gun right here.
No, the red gun.
And what is the length of this gun?
From breech to muzzle tip, you're looking at 1, 2, 3.5 approximately.
What's the difference in length between those two distances?
Like I said, about 2.5, 2 3/4 inches.
Okay. So when we were looking at your demonstrative, when you were trying to explain to the jurors, like where the gun could be, the gun that you were using to make that demonstration is 2 inches longer than the actual gun.
Yes, sir. I thought I made that pretty clear. If it wasn't, let me revisit it for you. If I can you get the PowerPoint back up?
Yes.
You may just want to stay up there, Mr. Body.
How important the numbers are to the analysis work that you do?
Depends on the context in which you're presenting it. This claim that some number is the same as any other number, Mr. Record, you need to be specific. What number do you want to talk about?
Okay. Is the difference in the length of the gun that you used to show the jury where Mr. McIver could have held it when it went off, is there any significance to the fact that the actual gun itself is 2 inches shorter?
Other than previously testified to, no. In this photograph, what we know is we've got a distance back, so 6 inches back. Well, it's at 8, so you would assume that the gun that Mr. McIver had could have had the barrel as far forward as number 2. In this demonstrative, and I want to reiterate, it is demonstrative, I made the point that my gun barrel extends an additional 2 inches, so you have to take that into consideration when you look at that photograph.
Okay.
Just as you have to take into consideration that the grip is 3/4 of an inch shorter.
Okay.
Which grip is shorter?
The
Red gun?
No, sir, the red gun is 3/4 of an inch longer than the actual weapon.
Right. So if you could, let me clear the screen.
Yes, sir.
Could you put a mark next to the 2 where Mr. McIver's, where the muzzle of his gun would have been? Could have been.
Could have been.
Could have been.
And I apologize, I'm not real good at that.
Hold on, let me clear it again.
How do you do
Would
this?
you actually put it on the tape?
I'm trying, but there, I got it. I just have to reassess.
Okay.
So,
okay.
based on that 6 inches, the gun that we're describing could have been as far forward as that,
Okay.
the end of the muzzle.
Right. And so now this is my point. if the gun could have been as far forward as that little green mark right there, wouldn't it bring the actual grip of the gun forward that same distance?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that could give information regarding intent, couldn't it?
I'm unclear of the question.
Okay.
Could you rephrase it?
That's okay. You also conclude that the only way this gun could have gone off is that you have to hold it on the side like that, right? The gun.
Already asked and answered, I believe, because we talked about positions.
Well, he asked an answer for you.
I'll let him answer it, if you understand the question.
I think I do.
Yeah.
Let's be precise, as you want to be. I think I made the point that the gun could have gone off intentionally or unintentionally. Unintentionally, there are multiple ways in which it could go. I wasn't there. As an analyst, I cannot presume. So if you're asking, I get the impression you're asking if the trigger was manipulated? Is that what you're asking me?
No, sir.
I am mistaken.
Let's get him to rephrase the question.
Yes, sir. Ask again, please.
I thought what I heard you say on direct examination in response to Mr. Harvey's questions. Maybe it's easier if I do it this way. You didn't bring your red gun with you today, did you?
No, sir, I didn't.
In the demonstrative, you indicate that the gun has to be kind of laying on the side like this. This is one possibility, correct?
Yes, sir.
You also said that it could be like this.
Certainly could. You're getting more contorted as you go, but yes.
Right. And so what you're saying to the jury is it is impossible for the gun to have been like this.
Yes, sir. I cannot accomplish that in that scene. It's not physically possible for me.
And it's not physically possible for you using a gun that is 3/4 of an inch bigger on the grip and 2 inches longer at the barrel.
Okay.
Correct?
And hold on, please. I want the record to be very clear. It couldn't be, it was impossible to be like that. The record won't show how it was. I want the record to be clear that when Mr. Gardner, the witness, testified it couldn't be like that, the gun was upright on Mr. Rucker's thigh. And that's the precise position that Mr. Gardner said it could not happen that way. Okay, for the record. Thank you.
Do you agree that's how it was positioned, Mr. Rucker?
Yes.
Okay.
Is gunshot residue visible to the naked eye?
GSRs, yes, sir.
You use words like the normal process, failure. What are you talking about with respect to what could have been done, or in your opinion, what should have been done with respect to the seat and the vehicle?
Well, shooting incident reconstruction is about isolating the location. The only data that we have available to isolate the location were the pants, and they walked off the scene and they were not recovered. Once they were gone, then the only thing we had left was the pattern on the back. Granted, there's a concern that this bag, which I could put my finger through, somehow affected a 700 to 800 foot per second effluent, directed, channelized effluent out. I don't know. I have a tough time accepting that. But if that's true, that would only affect one part of determining where the gun was. That would affect our ability to put the gun back as far as it went. Whereas it would not have any impact on evaluating that pattern to decide what was the closest it could have been.
Okay. And a question about the bag for a minute. Based on your experience, if any part of, assume it's a plastic grocery bag, any part of it was close to the muzzle when a shot was fired, what would that have done in terms of burning, melting, etc.?
Well, made a nice pretty hole, but frankly speaking, all we have to do is look at the pattern, sir. These little beige spots here, that's the bag blown to smithereens. That is not typical of GSR. That is particulate, very likely from that beige bag that the weapon was in. You would expect, if I hopefully have answered, you'd have a hole where the effluent from the muzzle occurred. And whether that was big or small, it would depend upon how far back. And then the muzzle, the cylinder gap flash would also blow out the sides of the bag.
Okay. I figured you'd say there'd be a hole.
Yes,
The
sir.
bullet would go through, but the effluent is not cold. Would it have any effect on the bag?
Oh, once again, if we presume that the gun is pulled back away from the bag.
I presume it's in the bag.
Yes, sir, but still in the bag, but not right up against it. In that instance, I think we would see a very distinct peppering of the bottom of the bag. Because effectively, those things are, well, it probably would be peppered to the point that there would be a bunch of little holes.
Sorry, sir. That's okay. Are you a gunshot residue expert?
No, sir, I'm not. I'm not a ballistics examiner. I do not conduct firearms examinations.
Okay. So let me ask you this. Even though we were out there looking at the vehicle for 2 hours, did you take samples of these little things on the back of the seat to test them to see if they were really from the bag or not?
Well, as I stated, sir, at the point in time when I looked at this vehicle, they were not present at all. I looked very closely to see if there was any remnants left, and there were not.
Right. And I guess that's my point. So when you say that comes from the bag, like, you're just really guessing about that, aren't you?
No, sir, I'm not.
Okay. How could you possibly know?
Because I routinely evaluate gunshot residue patterns as a crime scene analyst, as a homicide detective. I routinely teach shooting incident reconstruction where we produce these patterns, not just on paper, but on pigskin. I know what gunshot residues are. I've been teaching this for the past 20 years. I'm pretty confident I know what a gunshot residue is. I might not perform the analysis, but I routinely instruct and write in books to those who are ultimately going to be evaluating on scene what these look like. Yeah, I'm pretty comfortable knowing what a gunshot residue looks like and what's not gunshot residue.
I understand that. Tell me how you know that these little specks came from the bag.
Because I've got an intermixed pattern in which I've got beige particulate here. There is nothing in a gunpowder that is beige. This, whatever this is, was blown onto this surface. And it does not exist outside of the gunshot residue pattern. We can see several flakes or unburned gunpowder particles. But more importantly, that's not really what we're looking for. If you look in and around this area, you will see a very, very light gray residue. That is the nitrates. That's the primary, that's the vaporous lead and the nitrates that have been deposited. Once again, all these little particulates, they were tested. But I'm kind of a reasonable and rational and logical guy, and if I have a pattern here and it's gunshot residue, and I don't have this particulate here and the particulate's there, I tend to associate the two.
In other words, you make an assumption.
I think it's a pretty valid assumption, yes, sir.
Right. But it's an assumption, correct?
It's a very valid assumption.
Well, you know, there's a phrase about assumptions.
Yes, sir. And
Okay, I'm sorry. Let me ask you this.
Sir.
Did you know that this vehicle often is like traveling like on gravel, dirt roads, and actually it goes back and forth to a farm and a ranch located in Putnam County. Did you know that?
No, sir.
Let me ask you this. Is it possible you just tell the jurors this. Is it possible that some of what we see in this picture could be like transfer from like being outside, picking up dirt, bumping into the back of the seat, or anything like that? Is that possible?
The whole?
Not the whole. You know I'm not talking
Just
about
the little
whole.
particulate?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, the little gray stuff we see up there, the little tan stuff we see up there.
no, not without violating Occam's razor. Occam's razor. You're interjecting a series of independent assumptions. You're suggesting that this is really it's just dirt. But this dirt only happened to appear in the same area where the gunshot residues are. And this dirt didn't appear anywhere else, and somehow everything else got wiped away. Occam's razor, you're interjecting independent assumptions upon independent assumptions. If you want to suggest that, you're welcome to it. I would not join you in drinking that Kool-Aid.
No Kool-Aid for Mr. Gardner. Next question.
Yeah. Okay. 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 I'm working my way toward the end. I'm not wasting time, Judge. I'm trying to streamline so I can wrap this up. The bag.
Yes, sir.
Now, can you tell the jury if the trigger was manipulated by Mr. McIver's finger and the gun and his hand was inside of the public bag?
Yes, sir.
A bag or B bag?
I'm talking to you, no, a bag. All right, Judge. Thank you. All right.
Except we don't know. This
It's a hypothetical.
and it is a hypothetical, but there's been no testimony. There's nothing about how the gun was being held in the bag, and this is a demonstrative without any basis in the evidence.
Well, hold the objection. Let Mr. Rucker complete the hypothetical / demonstrative, and then he may be able to say it's consistent with X. It's already in evidence, or if it's not, and then I can evaluate. He hadn't quite gotten there yet.
If this gun, or a gun,
Yes, sir.
was placed inside of a bag like this, plastic bag, and the trigger was manipulated with, in this case, my finger, right?
Within the bag, yes, sir.
Inside the bag, and it goes
Right.
off. Would you expect to find gunshot particles and residue on my hand?
If they would check, I think that anything within that bag is going to have some because of the cylinder gap flash.
Okay. And the jurors have already heard about cylinder gap. They know what that is. So, would you expect to have gunshot particles and residue on my pants? Give me
Yes,
a
sir.
demonstrative, but not my shirt.
No, the shirt isn't an issue because if you're asking, will we find particles versus a pattern? Anything in that cab will have particles. So the shirt would have particles, but I'm not worried about particles. I'm worried about a pattern. The pants would have had the muzzle or the cylinder gap flash. Could have had a muzzle flash pattern as well.
Okay. How
So-
about?
So I guess just so I'm sure, particles, yeah, anything in that vehicle, pretty much everybody in that vehicle would very likely have particles on them.
Okay. And I understood you to say had Mr. McIver's hand been checked that night, we would have had some more information about.
No, sir, never discussed the hands.
I'm asking you.
Oh, I thought you said, I'm sorry, I thought you said I said that.
Just let me finish my question.
Yes, sir.
If Mr. McIver's hands were checked that night, we would have more information about the presence or absence of gunshot residue in particles.
No, sir. In fact, I don't even think GBI would have done the examination. This is an area of forensics. If you're talking pattern versus particle, the vast majority of laboratories in the United States no longer do particle. And the rationale is really simple. Particles appear, and that's an SEM particle, that unique lead I'm slow today, antium and barium mixture. Those are those primer residues. Most labs won't do those because effectively what that tells you is that someone was in proximity to a gunshot. It doesn't tell you if they were holding it or not. So I would challenge you that had you done an SEM examination of his hands, you would have known he was in that vehicle. That's what you would have known.
Okay. You know that the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's Department of Forensic Sciences is one of those labs that tests for the presence or absence of gunshot particles and residue on a person's hands, correct?
Are they still doing that? I was not
You don't
aware.
know?
No, I was unaware of that. Like I said, the vast majority of laboratories have stopped doing it.
Okay. Did you know we had a gunshot residue expert come and testify about it from the GBI?
Not particularly, no, sir.
No, you don't know that.
Well, again, sir, it doesn't affect my analysis, and I'm not going to change my opinion.
Right, I understand. Listen, let me ask you this, hypothetically.
Yes, sir.
Suppose I have my hand on the outside of the bag and the gun is on the inside of the bag. It is still possible, because as you said, the bag is really flimsy, that I could still manipulate the trigger with my finger and make the gun go off, correct?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Okay. And in connection with the testing you did, you actually made an opinion regarding the presence or the absence of Mr. McIver's DNA on the trigger, correct?
Repeat that, sir?
Okay.
I'm confused.
Wait a minute, hold on. I'm sorry, maybe that was a confusing question. You have a copy of your report?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay. Tell me, does your copy of the report say this? On page 6, the last sentence in the very last paragraph, the presence of Mr. McIver's DNA on the trigger is effectively moot with regard to this question, as he was in self-reported possession of the weapon prior to discharge.
Yes, sir.
That's what your opinion is, correct?
Well, that was my opinion based on a DNA report I read. I was under the impression that Mr. McIver's DNA had been found on the weapon. I don't do DNA examinations. I rely on the forensic folks to decide and bring data to us.
Okay. You had a copy of the report to review for your
No, sir, I don't.
of the DNA report.
No, sir, I do not.
You didn't have a copy of the DNA report?
I thought you asked, do I have a copy?
No. Listen to me, question.
Did I have a copy? Yes, sir, I did.
Yes, and that's what you reviewed when you put this conclusion in your report, right?
Yes, sir.
You relied on the DNA report
Yes, sir.
from the GBI Department of Division of Forensic Sciences.
Yes, sir.
Okay. We go to. Thank you. This is State's Exhibit number 309, Your Honor. And yes, sir, it is.
Well, I don't even know that it's demonstrative. The reports are, I thought, admitted for the record. If you want to share the report, see the professor's recollection, you guys should talk, but my practice is, sure, all these reports come in.
I understand. Take a look at the report. Let me direct you real quick. It is This is State Exhibit 309, page 1 of 2, and I'm going to focus you to the very last paragraph above the black line.
Yes, sir.
Okay, you've had a chance to read it?
Yes, sir.
Isn't it true that the DNA report says that the PCR amplification procedures were...
Well, now we're reading the report. Does it refresh his recollection? That's another question. But reading the report, I think, is...
So ask a question that may well be premised off of the paragraph you had him read, but without reading the report.
I understand. Isn't it true that there wasn't no DNA found on this trigger?
Absolutely.
Mr. McIver?
I have misread something, but again, it was a statement that the DNA wouldn't help us. But yes, I've made a critical, well, I won't call it critical because it doesn't affect my analysis, but I've made a significant error.
Even you admit it was a significant error.
Absolutely, sir.
You were just wrong about it, right?
Darn straight.
And let me ask you this. In looking at your CV, on the very, very last page, page 25, did you indicate that you were certified as a senior crime scene analyst from the International Association of Identification?
Correct, sir.
From 1990 until 2012.
2012.
So as of today, you are no longer a certified senior crime scene analyst with the International Association of Identification?
No, sir. I let it lapse in 2012 with the intention of taking the CSR certification, and then the IAI changed the rules, and now I can't be certified in anything because I don't work for a law enforcement agency.
I understand. Thank you very much. Judge, that's all my question.
Mr. Harvey, we've got about 10, 15 more minutes. Does that give you enough time for redirect, or should we? More than? It's all your way.
Way more, but I think I'd like to come up to the bench in
Okay.
some direction of the report.
All right. You ready? Now, which machine is talking to the system?
Yes, sir.
These actual exhibits are to the copy.
Great. If you could go to 0088.
88. Yes, sir, right there.
Okay. Is the door open in this picture?
Yes, sir, it is.
And then go to 0091, which is the next one. Is the door open in that picture?
Yes, sir, it is.
Any particular reason why it's open in those and closed in others?
Well, in this, the purpose of this demonstration is simply to show the orientation of the limitations of where the gun is and where it can be. I've ensured that the model is completely inside. If I close the door, trying to photograph that from the opposite side, we would not be able to demonstrate that specific thing. Whereas in the other photographs, we are demonstrating a specific spatial constraint. This one has to do with, gun at the side, the other one has to do with...
Excuse me, could you speak up because you're talking to the judge and the jury?
Yeah, you actually, I
Yes,
will
sir.
not feel bad if you talk to the jury.
So-
I'll be able to hear you.
So in the one, both of these photographs, the only way I can visualize that for you and take a good photograph is if the door is open. I have made sure that the model is completely inside. The door has been shut. We haven't changed it. We simply open it so we can take a picture. All we're demonstrating with these two photographs is where the gun, the orientation of the gun, why there's a limitation. In the other photographs, we're concerned with a completely different issue. For instance, here. The issue now is not how is the gun oriented. The issue is where can my elbow be? And the only functional way, that was an exceedingly difficult photograph to create, trust me. I was climbing around trying to photograph over the top, but I had to have the door shut in order to show how the door and the arm are interacting. The gun's orientation has nothing to do with this at this point. We've already dealt with that. This is simply showing why what limits movement.
What steps were taken, if any, to ensure that the front seat and the rear seat, passenger side, were in the same or pretty darn close, similar position to the way they were at the time of the incident?
That was a big issue. I was looking at the vehicle subsequent to it having been in multiple parties' possession. Mr. Rucker was present, and I asked him specifically about that. He felt that the vehicle had been, he told me, they felt that the vehicle's front seat had been returned. The rear seat doesn't reorient, but the front seat obviously orients in multiple planes. I had the crime scene photographs taken by APD on scene, and if I took those photographs and compared them to what I was looking at, it appeared that, in fact, I was in agreement with Mr. Rucker, that the seat appeared to be back in its original orientation, or very close to it. We can never, ever be absolutely sure that it's exactly alike.
The rear seat, from your analysis, didn't go up or down, not adjustable?
No, sir.
Vertical? I
did not see any indication with that seat that it would adjust vertically. I owned an Expedition. This is a different model, but I'm not aware of.
And what about the ability to have the rear seat slide forward closer to the front or rearward further from the front?
No, sir. I found no way that seat could be manipulated.
And then the back of the rear seat, could it recline?
Not recline. I believe it can be brought all the way forward, but it doesn't. I did not find anything that allows it to recline.
Okay.
Effectively, the bench seat appeared to me to be set.
So then the variable would be the way in which the front passenger seat was angled.
Yes, sir.
Explain to the jurors how the trajectory analysis would change if it turns out the seat was lean back more, lean forward more.
It's relatively easy to visualize. If the seat were leaned back, that's going to drop, whereas we're seeing just a slightly down, whether you accept 2.5 or the half doesn't really matter. But if I lean that back, that's going to either flatten that completely and or drop that trajectory. I don't think that's possible, simply because when you're in that seat, there's only 6 inches of separation between the trajectory rod and the bench. That's all you've got. You only have. So if that, and you're looking from the passenger side, if that rod or that seat were taken back, that would force that trajectory down. And frankly speaking, you're going to run out of room eventually. There's simply going to be no capability whatsoever to even do it. If you move the seat forward, then obviously that will raise the back. That will make it a more downward angled shot, which would then open up, Mr. Rucker's complaint about the weapon. Now suddenly we would be able to put the gun here because that rod would no longer be down here, it would be up here. So if that seat changed in any fashion from the time that the event occurred and the police took the photographs, that would be very problematic for all parties involved. It would just simply tell us that we don't know anything.
Can you explain to the jurors why it is that it's not feasible for the gun to have been between Mr. McIver's legs but upright? So in the position we see in those 3D photos, but not to the right of Mr. McIver, instead between his legs.
And I hope you can all visualize this. That left to right orientation takes the, I can't stand him.
Whatever will help demonstrate.
So, and I think we got this. So that left to right orientation, that weapon, if we carried it all the way back, we had nothing there, no shooter, anything, that trajectory is going to terminate right back here. So, once again, this goes to the assumption of where is Mr. McIver. Mr. McIver can't really move to his right. So he can't really, he's really going to force the issue. And again, I'm pretty good at approximations. It's about 6 inches. That trajectory rod, when it comes across that seat, is 6 inches up. So trying to put that gun down here and keep that orientation, once again, you're going to have to take this arm completely, I don't know how to describe it. He would be in a very convoluted position, very odd, tortured position, up like this.
So put your hands between your legs.
Well, that's the point, sir, is there are limitations. When I'm in that seat, and I got a little bit longer legs, I had to work hard to get mine really out of the way, because I do have longer legs now. But once this thigh is here, there's no place to put that as it comes across here. You're literally, you'd have to be right, maybe you could be right here if you forced him all the way over and you dropped it like this, maybe you could do that. It wasn't something I considered specifically because there's a certain reality check. I've got a gun, I'm in control of the gun. I rest the gun for whatever reason, intentional or unintentional, I am in control of the gun. Where would I expect the gun to be? Sitting on my lap. Sometimes simple common sense plays a big role. Can I eliminate that? No. Maybe. If you really just torture him over and he forces his body up against this, probably a lot easier with the left hand at that point. I think that's the best I can answer that, sir.
I appreciate it. Mr. Hardy, do you have any follow-up questions for Mr. Gardner?
Informing your opinion about placing the vehicle in the position on which it was on September 25th of 2016, did you have the original photographs from the APD, both from outside of the vehicle when it was stationary at Emory and when they first brought it in for processing?
Yes, sir.
Did that inform your ability to try to put the vehicle in as precise a position as it was on September 25th? Because you could look at the photographs.
Well, yes, sir, but the exterior photographs were not, I did not rely on, they were not important to me. Frankly speaking, the photographs I relied on were the ones where they had the door open, we were looking in, and we could see the orientation. That's the ones I relied on.
There were photographs from the outside to the inside. It
Yes,
showed the position of the relative position of
generally,
the seat.
but I need
And there were then-
landmarks.
I'm sorry.
I need landmarks.
And there were then photographs of the layout. Let me get the elbows. Thank you. example, State's Exhibit number 114,
Yes, sir.
shows the relative positions of the seats, correct?
Correct.
And I know that everyone, when you were there, made an effort to make sure that this orientation was as close as humanly possible to be able to evaluate that vehicle, correct?
My concern when I did the examination was, is the condition I found it consistent with these photographs? These are the photographs I relied on. At the time I did the examination, we had no way to adjust it. The battery had died, and if it had been off, I probably would not have done the examination at that point in time. So yeah, I relied on this photograph to compare to what I was visualizing with Mr. Rucker at the warehouse.
Good. That's all I have. Thank you, Judge.
Mr. Rucker, any follow-up?
I do, but I understood what you said. We're about 5 till.
Yeah, I need to go.
I would probably, a little more 5 minutes, but not much.
Okay. We need to break for lunch. Ladies and gentlemen, you all could be back at 1:45. We will get you in here at 1:45. Enjoy your lunch, Friday the 13th. And we'll talk about the case, no outside research during the lunch break. And we will wrap up Mr. Gardner's testimony upon your return. Have a good time.
All rise for the jury.